Why the Akkadian Empire vanished. What if the world's first empire, a civilization that rewrote how humans organize power, collapsed not because of bad generals or corrupt kings, but because of a shift in rainfall patterns nobody alive at the time could have detected? Around 2334 BCE, a man named Sargon of Akkad unified the competing Sumerian and Akkadian city-states of Mesopotamia under a single rule, creating what historians now recognize as the world's first empire. This wasn't simply a conquest. The Akkadian Empire unified two distinct linguistic and cultural groups, Semitic Akkadian speakers and Sumerian speakers, under one administrative structure. It was the first multi-ethnic state in recorded human history. Sargon's rise was itself extraordinary. Before founding his empire, he served as a cupbearer to the king of Kish, a high-ranking servant, but a servant. From that position, he seized power and built something the ancient world had never seen. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. Sargon declared himself a living god, the first ruler in recorded history to make that claim. Power, in his framework, wasn't delegated from the divine. He was the divine. Sargon's most durable tool was linguistic. Akkadian became the empire's lingua franca, the shared administrative language imposed across conquered territories. A governor in the south and a tax collector in the north wrote in the same script. Here's a misconception worth correcting directly. Most people assume the capital city of Akkad is a known, mapped location. It isn't. Despite decades of excavation across Mesopotamia, archaeologists have never definitively located the city of Akkad. The empire reached its height under Sargon's grandson Naram-Sin, who extended Akkadian control from the Mediterranean coast to the Persian Gulf. By any measure of the era, this was the dominant superpower on Earth. Then, around 2154 BCE, the empire was gone. The collapse was shockingly fast. A civilization that had reorganized an entire region ceased to function as a coherent state within a generation or two. Ancient texts blamed the Gutians, a group from the Zagros Mountains who overran Akkadian territory. For centuries, historians accepted this as the primary cause. But invasion alone rarely explains why an empire stops functioning at its administrative core. Here's the question the Gutian explanation can't answer. Why did the agricultural villages of northern Mesopotamia, the empire's grain-producing heartland, appear to be abandoned before the Gutians even arrived in force? Excavations at Tel Leilon in northeastern Syria, one of the Akkadian Empire's key northern agricultural centers, revealed something disturbing. A thick layer of windblown dust sitting directly on top of the last occupation level. That dust layer isn't debris from warfare. It's aeolian sediment, wind-deposited material that accumulates when vegetation collapses and soil is exposed. It's the physical signature of a landscape that dried out, rapidly and severely. The definitive evidence came not from ruins, but from marine sediment cores drilled from the Gulf of Oman, specifically from core site ODP 723 on the Arabian Sea margin. These cores preserve a chemical record of past climate, layer by layer, century by century. The cores showed a dramatic spike in windblown dust and a sharp decline in moisture indicators beginning around 4,200 years ago, exactly coinciding with the Akkadian Empire's collapse. This event now has a name, the 4.2 kiloyear event. The mechanism was agricultural. Northern Mesopotamia depended on rain-fed grain cultivation. When rainfall dropped sharply, estimates suggest a reduction of 25 to 50%. Harvests failed. Without grain surpluses, the empire couldn't pay its armies or feed its cities. Drought didn't simply reduce harvests, it triggered a sequence of failures, each one making the next worse. When northern villages became uninhabitable, populations moved south, flooding into cities like Nippur and that were already struggling to feed themselves. Archaeological surveys of southern sites show a sharp spike in settlement density during this period. More people, less food, no administrative mechanism to manage the imbalance. Tax revenue collapsed because there was no surplus to tax. The army couldn't be paid. Provincial governors stopped receiving orders they had any reason to obey. Political authority didn't so much fall as evaporate. And into that fractured territory, the Gutians moved, not as conquerors of a functioning empire, but as opportunists filling a vacuum. This reframes the entire narrative. The Gutians didn't destroy a healthy empire. They occupied the ruins of one already collapsing under environmental stress. Blaming the Gutians is like blaming the looters after a building has already burned. There's a second misconception worth correcting. The Akkadian Empire is often remembered purely as a military project, but its cultural footprint outlasted its political collapse. Akkadian remained the dominant written language of the Near East for over 1,000 years after the empire fell. The 4.2 kiloyear event wasn't a local Mesopotamian problem. Sediment and ice core records show simultaneous drought conditions affecting the Indus Valley civilization, Old Kingdom Egypt, and early Chinese cultures, all within the same narrow climatic window. That synchronicity matters. It suggests the first generation of complex, large-scale civilizations, all of which emerged during the Holocene climatic optimum, a warm and wet period lasting from roughly 9,000 to 5,000 BCE, shared a common vulnerability. They were optimized for the climate that created them. The Akkadian Empire's ambition made it brittle. Administering territory from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf required reliable grain flows from the north. When those flows stopped, the empire had no fallback. Scale had become a liability. The sediment core discovery also changed how historians and climate scientists collaborate. In 1993, archaeologist Harvey Weiss and his colleagues published a landmark paper in Science directly linking the Tel Leilon dust layer to the Akkadian collapse, one of the first studies to use paleoclimate proxy data to explain a specific historical event. That paper established the Akkadian case as the template for environmental archaeology. And yet, despite everything science has revealed about why the empire fell, we still can't find where it was centered. The city of Akkad, Sargon's capital, the administrative heart of the world's first empire, remains unlocated to this day. So, return to the opening question. Could rainfall patterns destroy the world's first empire? The sediment record says yes, unambiguously. The empire didn't fall to a stronger enemy. It fell to a drier sky. If you want one image to hold on to, make it this. At Tel Leilon, archaeologists found a layer of wind-blown gray dust, roughly 60 centimeters thick, sitting directly on top of the last inhabited floor. Below it, a city. Above it, silence for 300 years. 3 centuries of abandonment, compressed into one geological layer you could span with your arm. That's not metaphor. That's stratigraphy, the physical record of human absence written in dust. What makes it striking is what's missing above that layer. No transitional debris, no gradual thinning of occupation material, no signs of a slow retreat. Radiocarbon dating of organic material immediately below the dust layer places the abandonment at approximately 2200 BCE, confirming it was abrupt, not gradual. A city was there, then it wasn't. The methodology Weiss pioneered at Tel Leilon has since been applied to other collapsed civilizations with equally striking results. Studies of the classic Maya collapse, long blamed on warfare and political fragmentation, found lake-bed sediment cores from sites like Lake Chichen Canab in Mexico, showing a severe drought signal between 800 and 1000 CE, precisely matching the period of city abandonment. In both cases, the sediment resolved what the inscriptions could not. The political story was real, but the environmental story came first. Sargon's empire lasted roughly 180 years, from 2334 to 2154 BCE, by the standard scholarly dating, though some estimates place the span closer to 170 years, depending on how the final years of Gutian encroachment are counted. However you measure it, the empire proved something that couldn't be unproven, that large-scale, multi-ethnic political organization was possible. Every empire that followed, Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian, built on that proof of concept. Akkadian, as a lingua franca, survived the empire's political death by more than a millennium. Diplomatic correspondence across the ancient Near East was still written in Akkadian as late as 1200 BCE, 300 years after Babylon had replaced Akkad as the regional power. Here's something that might surprise you. The 4.2 kiloyear event isn't merely a historical curiosity. Climate scientists and urban resilience planners now use it as a named stress test scenario when modeling the vulnerability of modern water and food systems. The United Nations Environment Program has cited it as a reference case for understanding how abrupt aridification can outpace institutional adaptation, meaning the Akkadian collapse isn't just a lesson from the past, it's a calibration point for the future. The Akkadian Empire's real lesson is this: every civilization is a bet on climate stability. Sargon built the world's first empire during an unusually wet period in Mesopotamian history. When that period ended, so did he. Modern cities now explicitly model ancient collapse events like the 4.2 kiloyear drought when stress testing infrastructure, because the oldest lesson in the sediment record is also the most current. Build as if the climate will change, because it always does. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more.